Oh, Mom, you told us that story 10 minutes ago. Don't you remember? The words, spoken by my daughter-in-law, Brenda, hung in the air over the half-eaten roast chicken. We were in my son Mark's dining room. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing over the table. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. A hot flash of shame crawled up my neck. I hadn't told that story. I had only been thinking it. Brenda's smile was full of pity. It was the kind of smile you give a child who has fallen and scraped their knee. Across the table, Mark looked at me, his brow creased with worry. That look, from my own son, hurt more than Brenda's words. I looked down at my plate, at the mashed potatoes I had made and brought over myself. Suddenly, they looked like glue. My credibility, my own mind, was being served up for dessert, and I didn't know how to stop it. The following Tuesday, I found Brenda in my kitchen. The sharp, chemical smell of a permanent marker hit me the moment I walked in. She was writing on my cabinet doors with a thick, black marker. She'd already labelled plates and glasses. She turned, holding the cap in her teeth. "Oh, good. You're here," she said, pulling the marker from her mouth. "I'm just making things a little easier for you. So you don't get confused, dear." She drew a slightly crooked rectangle around the word silverware. I had kept my forks in that drawer for 42 years. I ran my hand over the smooth oak door, feeling the ghost of my late husband's touch from when he'd installed them. Mark stopped by after work. He saw the ugly black letters scrawled across my kitchen. "That's a thoughtful idea of Brenda's, Mom," he said, giving my shoulder a squeeze. I just nodded. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a visitor who couldn't be trusted to find a spoon. The phone rang on Thursday afternoon, interrupting the hum of my refrigerator. It was Martha, the head of my church's prayer group. Her voice was syrupy with concern. "Carol, dear, I'm just calling to see if you're doing okay," she asked. "I'm fine, Martha. Just watching my afternoon shows." There was a little pause. "It's just, Brenda stopped by the potluck planning meeting. She mentioned you've been having some episodes." Episodes. The word felt like a small, sharp stone in my throat. This was spreading. It was moving out from my son's dining room and into the world. I thanked Martha for her call and hung up, my hand trembling slightly. Later, as I was watering the petunias on my porch, my neighbour, Mrs. Gable, waved from her yard. "Brenda stopped by yesterday," she called over the fence. "Such a sweet girl. She asked me to keep an extra eye on you, just in case." Brenda came over with a tuna casserole that smelled faintly of burnt cheese. She set it on my counter, right next to a small stack of my mail. Her eyes landed on the blue and white envelope from the Social Security Administration. She picked it up, weighing it in her hand. "It's all so complicated now, Carol," she said, her voice soft and reasonable. "All this online banking and passwords. It's too much for anyone to keep track of. Let me take this burden off you." I gently took the mail from her hand and placed it back on the counter. "That's very kind, Brenda, but I'm managing just fine." Her smile tightened. It was a quick, small movement, but I saw it. It didn't reach her eyes, which were watching me like a hawk watches a field mouse. "Of course, dear," she said. The air in my sunny kitchen suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. My son Mark called that evening. I was knitting a blanket for the church drive, the soft wool warm in my hands. His voice on the phone had that careful, gentle tone he used when he was about to ask for something he knew I wouldn't like. "Mum, Brenda and I were talking," he began. The television murmured in the background. "Oh?" I said, keeping my own voice light. We think it would be a good idea for you to give her power of attorney over your finances, he said, the words coming out in a rush. Just in case, Mom. It's the responsible thing to do. For your own protection. For my protection. The knitting needles stopped clicking. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. This was moving much, much faster than I had thought. The next Tuesday was my grocery day. Brenda insisted on driving me. At the checkout, the hum of the freezers seemed to get louder. I pulled out my debit card, the one I'd had for 10 years. Brenda placed a warm hand on my arm, speaking loudly to the young cashier. Her memory is just not what it was, she announced with a sad smile. I'll help her with the PIN. I snatched my hand away. I know my own PIN, Brenda. My voice was quiet, but it felt like a shout inside my head. My cheeks burned as I punched in the numbers perfectly. The cashier, a girl with bright pink hair, wouldn't meet my eyes. That afternoon, I found a brochure tucked inside my mail. The front had a picture of smiling seniors sitting in a sunny garden. The words were large and cheerful. Golden Days Memory Care. A few days later, I couldn't find my late husband's watch. It was a simple Timex, but he wore it every day for 40 years. I always kept it in the little velvet box on my dresser. Now, the box was empty. I felt a wave of pure panic, my heart thumping against my ribs. I tore through my drawers, the scent of his old cedar chest filling the air. Nothing. Brenda came over with a casserole and found me frantic. "Oh, Carol, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. I told her about the watch. She tutted softly. She walked over to the living room bookshelf, reached behind a photo of our son Mark, and pulled out the watch. "Here it is, silly. You must have put it here and forgotten." She gave me a look of profound pity. I could have sworn I looked there 3 times. For the first time, a tiny, cold seed of doubt about myself began to sprout. My oldest friend, Susan, came for tea on Friday. The smell of her cinnamon coffee cake always made my kitchen feel right again. I poured us tea into my good china cups, the ones with the little blue flowers. My hands were shaking just a little. I told her everything. About the cabinet labels, the prayer group, the watch. I expected her to look worried, to maybe even agree with Brenda. Instead, she put her cup down with a firm click. She looked me dead in the eye. "Carol," she said, her voice steady as a rock. "You are the sharpest woman I know. Something is wrong here." A little warmth bloomed in my chest, a tiny spark of fight I thought had gone out. It felt like the first breath of fresh air after being underwater. The next week, my car keys vanished. I was supposed to drive to my book club meeting. I checked my purse, the hook by the door, the pocket of my coat from yesterday. They were simply gone. I felt that familiar, hot wave of panic. Brenda came over, supposedly to drop off some mail. "Oh dear," she said, watching me search. "Maybe it's for the best. You know, driving can be so stressful." She suggested that my son, Mark, should probably hold on to my spare set, just in case. Later that evening, Mark called. "Brenda told me you lost your keys, Mum. I'll just hold on to the spare set for you, okay? For safety." I felt a wall of glass slide down between me and the world. I was trapped. After I hung up, I went to water the geraniums on the porch, and my fingers brushed against something hard in the soil. I dug into the dirt and pulled out my keys. My niece, Sarah, lives in Oregon. We had our monthly video call that Saturday. I was telling her about the roses in my garden, how the yellow ones were finally blooming. The screen was a little fuzzy, but I could see her smiling. Brenda, who was visiting, kept leaning into the camera. "What Mum means to say is, She thinks they're yellow, she'd interrupt, laughing lightly. Her timeline is a little jumbled. I tried to tell a story about Mark when he was a little boy. Brenda cut in again. Oh, Mum, that was his cousin Jimmy, remember? I stopped talking. I watched my niece's face on the screen. I saw the shift in her eyes, the small flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. The isolation was no longer a fear. It was a room, and the door had just been locked. That Tuesday, Brenda left in a hurry to get her nails done. The front door clicked shut, and the sound of her car engine faded down the street. The house suddenly felt quiet and large. I sank into my armchair, the floral fabric cool against my arms. A faint, sweet smell of her perfume hung in the air, the kind that gives you a headache. That's when I saw it. Her tablet, lying on the coffee table next to my knitting basket. A moment later, the screen lit up with a soft chime. A notification appeared. It was from a website forum, a single line of text under the title. Tips for dealing with a parent with dementia? My heart went cold. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I know I shouldn't have, but I tapped the screen. Her post history was right there. Months of it. My mother-in-law is getting so forgetful, it's dangerous. She made up a whole story about me losing her keys. How do you convince a stubborn parent to give up control of their finances? Each post was a careful, deliberate lie. The cloud of doubt that had been fogging my mind for a year vanished. It was replaced by something hard and clear as ice. I picked up the phone. My fingers were steady now. Susan answered on the second ring. Carol, you sound different. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Susan, it's happening. It's all been a lie. I told her everything. The tablet, the forum posts, the labels on my cabinets. I talked until my throat was raw. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The only sound was the hum of my old refrigerator. Then Susan's voice came through, firm and strong. Good. Now we fight back. First rule, document everything. After we hung up, I put on my coat and drove to the electronics store. I bought a small digital voice recorder, no bigger than my thumb. I also bought a 3-pack of spiral notebooks and a set of good black pens. The cashier was a young man with kind eyes. Getting organized? He asked. Something like that, I said. I felt a tiny spark of life I hadn't felt in months. I spent the next 2 days practicing with the little recorder. I learned how to turn it on with a silent flick of a switch, without even looking. It fit perfectly in the deep pocket of my apron. The little red light was no bigger than a pinprick. When Brenda came over on Friday, the recorder was running. The weight of it against my hip was a secret comfort. She brought more papers. Mark and I were just thinking, Mum. It would be so much easier if we had this finalized. She laid the power of attorney forms on my kitchen table, right on top of my recipe box. She even brought a brochure for a notary service. I've already circled their number for you, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I just smiled. I'll think about it, dear. That night, I opened one of my new notebooks. On the first page, I wrote the date. Then I wrote down every word she had said. The ink looked so dark and final on the clean white page. The following Monday, I made an appointment with my family doctor. I'm coming in for my annual physical, I told the receptionist, and I'd like to schedule a cognitive assessment too. Of course, Carol. Is everything all right? She asked. Everything is fine, I said. I just want to be thorough. I went to the appointment alone. I sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table while Dr. Evans listened to my heart. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol. My daughter-in-law is worried about my memory, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I'd like to have a baseline, for my own peace of mind. He asked me a series of questions. Who is the president? What year is it? Count backward from 100 by sevens. I answered everyone. At the end, he smiled, his eyes kind over his glasses. Carol, you have the cognitive health of a woman 15 years younger. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your mind. He printed out a copy of the official report for me. I folded the papers and put them in my purse. Walking out into the bright sunshine, I had to stop and lean against the warm brick of the building. I finally had proof. My mind wasn't broken, it was just under attack. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my phone. The steam from the mug warmed my face. I dialed the number for my financial advisor, Mr. Henderson. I'd known him for 20 years. He'd helped my husband and me set up our retirement. Mr. Henderson, it's Carol Peterson, I said when he answered. Carol, so good to hear from you. I hope you're well. I am very well, thank you, I said. I'm calling for a rather unusual reason. I need to add a layer of security to my accounts. I explained, carefully and calmly, that my family was concerned about my memory, and that I wanted to ensure no one could access my funds without my direct permission. I didn't call Brenda a liar. I didn't sound emotional. I just stated the facts. I understand completely, he said, his voice all business. We can add a verbal password to the file. What would you like it to be? I thought for a moment. Victory, I said. The password is victory. He typed it into my file. I could hear the soft clicking of his keyboard over the line. I felt another lock snap into place, another door secured. When I hung up, I looked out the window at my rose bushes. It was time to start pruning. The next Tuesday, I set my little trap. Brenda came over with a lemon loaf from the grocery store bakery that smelled more like floor cleaner than citrus. I had my little recorder tucked right into my apron pocket, nestled in the floral print. We sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea that steamed up the window. Brenda, dear, I said, stirring my tea slowly. I've been thinking. This house is just so much for one person. I think I might sell it. I just can't manage anymore. Her eyes lit up. It was quick, like a cat spotting a bird, but I saw it. She covered it with a look of concern, placing her hand on mine. Her skin was cool and dry. Oh, Carol, are you sure? Well, if you think it's for the best, I know a wonderful realtor. She specializes in helping seniors downsize. She's very efficient. I nodded, looking down at my cup. That's nice of you to offer. I listened to her go on about commissions and market values, her voice full of false sympathy. She thought my silence was weakness. I just sat there thinking, my mind isn't failing. My tolerance for nonsense is. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was tight with anxiety. Mum, Brenda told me you're selling the house. Why didn't you say anything to me? I didn't argue with Mark. I just told him I was exploring all my options, which was true. The next morning, I put on my good navy blue coat and drove myself to see a lawyer. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she had an office in a small brick building downtown, right above the bakery. The air in the hallway smelled of yeast and sugar. Eleanor was my age, with sharp blue eyes and silver hair in a neat bun. Her office didn't have dark wood and leather. It had potted plants and a colourful quilt hanging on the wall. I sat in a comfortable chair that didn't creak. So, Carol, she said, after I explained everything. Let me get this straight. She's building a case against your mind. That's about the size of it, I said. I pushed my doctor's report across the desk. along with the little notebook where I'd written down dates and comments. She read the doctor's letter first, her lips a thin, firm line. Then she flipped through my notebook. She looked up at me, and her expression wasn't pity, it was respect. "All right," she said, tapping a pen on her legal pad. "Let's get your will and trust Brenda proofed." A week later, I was back in Eleanor's office. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. The legal documents were spread out on her desk. They were printed on thick, cream-coloured paper that felt important in my hands. "Are you certain about the executor?" Eleanor asked gently. I looked at the line where my son Mark's name used to be. Now, it held the name of my niece, Sarah. It hurt. It felt like a failure, a deep, maternal ache. But protecting the life my husband and I built was more important than my hurt feelings. "I'm certain," I said. We set up a trust. It made sure Mark would always have what he needed, but the money was managed by the bank. Brenda would never be able to touch a single penny of it. I signed my name with Eleanor's heavy fountain pen. The ink was a dark, decisive blue. As I drove home, the weight of the decision settled on me, but it felt solid, like a stone foundation, not a burden. It was time for another small test. I knew Brenda sometimes listened in on my phone calls with Mark, so I planned it carefully. While they were on the phone one afternoon, with me on the kitchen phone and Mark on his cell, I made sure to mention it. "Oh, that reminds me. I have that checkup with Dr. Miller tomorrow at 10. My memory is so spotty, I'd forget my own head if it wasn't attached." Brenda, of course, offered to call and confirm for me the next morning, just to be helpful. I thanked her profusely. I sat by the phone with my recorder on, a plate of shortbread cookies on the table. Right on schedule, I heard her pick up the extension in the guest room. I recorded her entire call to the doctor's office. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "I'm just so worried about her," she told the nurse. "She's getting terribly confused, missing appointments, forgetting whole conversations. We're afraid she's a danger to herself." The lies were so smooth, so practiced. An hour later, my phone rang. It was the nurse from Dr. Miller's office, her voice filled with genuine professional concern. "Mrs. Gable," she said kindly, "I'm just calling to check in. Is everything all right at home?" That night, I couldn't sleep. The nurse's worried voice echoed in my head. Brenda's poison was spreading. I got out of bed, the floorboards cool beneath my bare feet, and went to the living room. The only light was from the moon, casting long shadows across the carpet. I pulled out the big, velvet-covered photo album from the bottom of the bookshelf. It smelled faintly of old paper and glue. I sat on the floor and opened it, running my fingers over the plastic covering the pictures. There was my Robert, handsome in his army uniform. There we were on our wedding day. There he was, holding baby Mark, his face split by a grin of pure joy. I stopped at a picture of us on our 25th anniversary. We were standing by the rose bushes in the backyard. I looked so serious, and he was laughing at me. I could almost hear his voice. "You're tougher than you look, Carol," he always used to say. "Tough as a $2 steak." Looking at his kind eyes, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. This wasn't just about me and Brenda. This was about our life, our family, our home, and I would not let her burn it to the ground. I closed the album, my resolve hardening like steel. I knew what I had to do next. The day she walked into the trap was a Tuesday. I was on the sofa, pretending to nap under my favorite Afghan. The air smelled of the lemon polish Brenda used on my furniture, a smell I was starting to hate. She thought I was asleep. I heard her rustle in her purse, then the soft beeps of her dialing the phone. My little digital recorder was on the end table, right next to my reading glasses, its tiny red light hidden by a copy of Good Housekeeping. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Hello, Mr. Henderson, please. This is Carol Peterson." My own name from her mouth. It made the skin on my arms prickle. There was a pause. "Oh, yes, the password. It's Bluebird, of course." My heart hammered against my ribs. That was the fake password I'd given her, not the real one I'd given him. I heard the muffled sound of Mr. Henderson's voice on the other end. Brenda's tone changed. Well, I must have gotten confused. My memory is just not what it was. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's actually why I'm calling. This is Brenda, her daughter-in-law. I'm so worried about her. She's having episodes, forgetting things. I really think I need to be on her accounts to help manage them." She went on for 5 solid minutes, painting a picture of a doddering old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own social security check. Mr. Henderson was polite, but firm. I could hear the finality in his tone, even through the phone. When Brenda hung up, the sharp click echoed in the quiet room. She sighed, a puff of pure frustration. After she left, locking the door behind her, I lay there for a long time, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The recording was perfect. That evening, I poured myself a small glass of sherry and sat at my kitchen table. I plugged the recorder into my old laptop. The click of the mouse was loud in the silence. First, there was just a soft hiss. Then Brenda's voice filled my kitchen, clear as a bell. Hearing her lies, so calm and practiced, didn't make me cry. It turned the last of my sadness into something cold and hard, like a river stone. I saved the file to my computer. Then I saved it to a little USB drive that I pinned inside my sewing box. Then I emailed it to my friend Susan with the subject line, "Christmas Carol." She called me 2 minutes later. "Oh, my word, Carol," she said, her voice low. "You got her. You really got her." "I did," I said, looking out the window at the first dusting of snow on my rose bushes. "Now I just need to wrap it." Christmas was 3 weeks away. Christmas Day arrived, smelling of roasted turkey and pine needles from the tree in the corner. My brother, Robert, and my niece, Sarah, were there. And, of course, Mark and Brenda. The dining room table was set with my best china, the plates my late husband and I had bought 40 years ago. Brenda was buzzing around me like a fly. "Here, Mum, let me cut your turkey for you," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't want to struggle." I let her. I smiled my vague, sweet smile and let her fuss over me. I let her pat my hand and tell Mark that I seemed a little tired today. I ate my mashed potatoes and drank my water, feeling the weight of the small Bluetooth speaker in my good purse, which sat on the floor beside my chair. I was playing a long game, and I had all the patience in the world. I just needed to wait for the pie to be served. The main course was done. The dirty plates were stacked in the kitchen, and the smell of coffee was starting to fill the air. Robert was telling a story about his golf game. Sarah was showing my son a picture on her phone. It was the perfect moment. A quiet lull, warm and sleepy. I cleared my throat softly. Everyone looked at me. "You know," I said, my voice steady and calm. "My memory has been such a topic of conversation this year." Brenda immediately reached over and patted my hand. Her rings felt cold against my skin. "It's okay, Mom," she cooed, giving Mark a look of deep sympathy. "We know it's hard. We're here for you. We all are." She squeezed my hand, a gesture of ownership. I pulled my hand away gently. I reached down and lifted my purse onto my lap. The clasp made a sharp little click as I opened it. "Actually," I said, meeting my son's worried eyes. I have something I'd like to share with everyone. I took out the small black speaker, no bigger than a bar of soap, and placed it in the center of the table, right next to the gravy boat. Then, I pushed the little button on top. A soft blue light blinked on, followed by a quiet electronic chime. And then, Brenda's voice filled the stunned silence of the dining room. Not her cheerful Christmas dinner voice. It was the sharp, conniving voice from the recording. "Hello, Mr. Henderson, please. This is Carol Peterson." My son Mark frowned, confused. My niece Sarah's eyes widened. Across the table, I watched the color drain from Brenda's face. She knew that voice. She knew exactly what was coming next. Brenda's voice, tinny and sharp from the little speaker, filled the dining room. First, she tried to sound like me, a poor imitation that made my niece's fork stop halfway to her mouth. Then came her real voice, dripping with false concern, as she told Mr. Henderson I'd been having terrible episodes. The smell of roast turkey and cinnamon from the apple pie suddenly felt thick and suffocating. I watched her face. The cheerful holiday mask melted away, leaving something pale and pinched. She looked at Mark, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the speaker on the table as if it were a snake. The recording went on, capturing every lie, every desperate plea for access to my money. When it got to the part where Mr. Henderson told her firmly that he would only speak to me, a little muscle in Brenda's jaw started to twitch. My brother put his fork down with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. The recording ended. A tiny electronic beep echoed, and then there was only the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. No one moved. No one breathed. My niece stared at me, her eyes wide. My brother's knuckles were white where he gripped his own napkin. The candles on the table flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on their frozen faces. I picked up my fork, speared a piece of roasted carrot, and looked at the bowl of mashed potatoes sitting just out of my reach. I cleared my throat softly. "Could someone please pass the potatoes?" My brother, David, was the first one to find his voice. It was low and tight with anger. "Brenda," he said, not looking at me, but right at her. "What in God's name was that?" My niece just shook her head, her mouth slightly open. Mark was as white as the tablecloth, a statue of a man, unable to look at me, unable to look at his wife. The silence stretched again, pulled thin and tight. Then Brenda broke it. Her voice was shrill, ugly. "You see?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's manipulative. She tricked me." I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I simply took a bite of my turkey. It was a little dry, but I chewed it slowly, calmly. My silence was a shield, and her screaming just bounced right off it. All her power, all the little pokes and jabs and whispers she had used for a year, were gone. She was just a woman shouting at a dinner table. Mark finally turned his head and looked at his wife. His face was completely empty. "Brenda," he said, his voice flat. "Get your coat. We're leaving." They left without another word. We heard the front door open and close with a heavy, final click. For a moment, we all just sat there, listening to the silence they left behind. My niece, Sarah, let out a long breath she seemed to have been holding all night. I looked at my brother. "This has been going on for a year," I said, my voice perfectly steady. David pushed his chair back, came around the table, and pulled me into a hug. His sweater was rough against my cheek. "Carol," he whispered, his voice thick, "I am so, so sorry. We should have seen it." The day after Christmas, the house was finally quiet. The scent of pine from the tree and leftover roast turkey hung in the air. The phone rang, shrill in the silence. It was Mark. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up the heavy receiver in the hall. His voice was thick with tears. "Mum," he sobbed. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I can't believe I let this happen." I listened to the hum of the line, my back straight against the wall. "I know you didn't, Mark." "What do I do?" he pleaded. "How do I fix this?" I took a slow breath. "I love you, son, but I am very disappointed. We will talk when you've had time to think. Really think about all of it." I placed the receiver gently back in its cradle. The silence that followed was not lonely. It was mine. Later that afternoon, I was knitting in my favorite armchair when my phone started buzzing on the end table. A text message, then another, and another. It was Brenda. The screen lit up with angry words, accusing me of being cruel, manipulative. I didn't need to read them all. The tone was enough. The phone buzzed again, a furious little vibration on the polished wood. I put down my knitting, the soft wool a comfort in my lap. I picked up the phone, opened my contacts, and found her name. I pressed the button that said, "Block." The buzzing stopped. A profound sense of peace washed over me like a warm tide. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. The question was, what was left in the wreckage? Mark called 2 days later. He asked if we could meet. I said yes, but not at my house, and not at his. I suggested a little coffee shop over on Elm Street, one neither of us ever went to. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a squeaky vinyl booth. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were puffy, and he needed a shave. "I'm staying at a hotel," he said, his hands trembling around a thick white mug. "I couldn't be in the house with her." I just nodded and took a sip of my tea. The air smelled of cinnamon and coffee. "What can I do, Mom?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Tell me what to do to fix this." I looked at my son, really looked at him. "This isn't about me telling you what to do," I said softly. "You need to understand how this happened. I think you should get therapy. And you need to understand that my trust is something you have to earn back. It won't happen overnight." He just nodded, staring down into his cup like it held all the answers. For the first time in a year, he wasn't arguing or explaining. He was listening. The next morning, sunlight streamed into my kitchen, making the little dust motes dance in the air. I felt clear-headed. I sat at my kitchen table, the solid wood familiar under my elbows, and made a phone call. "Eleanor? It's Carol," I said, when my lawyer answered. "Good morning, Carol. What can I do for you?" Her voice was always so crisp and capable. "I need you to send a letter to Brenda," I said, my own voice steady. "A cease and desist. I want no further contact from her. None at all." "Consider it done," Eleanor said without hesitation. "It will be firm and official." Hanging up, I felt another layer of armor click into place. It wasn't made of anger. It was made of peace. And a good lawyer. That afternoon, I decided to reclaim my kitchen. I got a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a soft cloth and started on the cabinets. One by one, I scrubbed away Brenda's thick, black marker labels. Cups, plates, spices. The sharp, clean smell of the alcohol filled the room. The ink smudged, then vanished, leaving the familiar warm wood grain I'd known for 40 years. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. After I finished, I went to the guest room to strip the bed Brenda had used. As I pulled off the fitted sheet, a folded piece of paper fluttered out from between the mattress and the box spring. It was a receipt from a fancy jewelry store downtown, dated 6 months ago. It was for a man's watch, a very expensive one. It wasn't for my son, Mark. And a cold little thought pricked at me as I remembered the day she found my late husband's watch. Just who had Brenda been buying expensive gifts for? I decided it was time to clear the air. I baked a lemon pound cake, the one with the good vanilla, and brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea. The ladies from the church prayer group came over that Tuesday. The same ladies Brenda had filled with stories of my episodes. They sat on my good sofa, balancing the little china cups on their knees. The afternoon sun made patterns on the rug. I didn't cry or raise my voice. I just told them, "There's been a difficult situation with my daughter-in-law. She was worried about my finances, and it led to a misunderstanding." I didn't need to play the recording for them. The story of what happened at Christmas had already made the rounds. Martha, the group leader, reached over and patted my hand. Her skin felt like dry paper. "Carol, dear," she said, her voice full of warmth. "We never for a moment believed you were losing your wits. We were just worried for you." The other ladies murmured in agreement. I realized then that the gossip network, the one Brenda tried to use against me, was now my strongest shield. The next week, I saw a notice in the paper for the community garden. I hadn't worked in a garden for years, not since my husband passed. I put on his old straw hat and drove down there. The air smelled of damp earth and sunshine. I spent the whole morning on my knees, my hands deep in the cool dirt, pulling weeds from a neglected plot. It felt good to be tired from real work, not from worry. I felt the sun on my back and the ache in my muscles. I wasn't Mark's confused mother or Brenda's victim. I was just Carol, a woman planting tomatoes. By the time I went home, my fingernails were dirty and my heart was quiet. I was planting roots in my own life again. Mark started calling every Sunday afternoon, right after church. The first few calls were stiff. He'd ask how I was, and I'd say, "I'm fine, Mark." Then there would be a long silence, filled only by the hum of my refrigerator. "I started seeing that therapist," he said one day. "That's good," I replied, twisting the phone cord around my finger. "He says I need to learn to listen," Mark said. His voice was small. I didn't fill the silence for him. I just waited. It was the first time in a long time he seemed to be thinking about my needs instead of his own. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it felt like a path was clearing. The mail came one Thursday, and with it, a thick, creamy envelope. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it with my husband's old letter opener. The letter was from Brenda's divorce attorney. It was full of legal words, but the meaning was clear. She was making a claim on a portion of my estate as part of her settlement from Mark, claiming future inheritance. I picked up the phone and called Eleanor. I read the important parts to her. I heard her give a short, dry laugh on the other end of the line. "Oh, she's desperate," Eleanor said. "Don't you worry about that for 1 second, Carol. She has a better chance of getting water from a rock." I felt a wave of relief. Then I read the last sentence of the lawyer's letter. It said Brenda's claim was especially urgent due to the fact that she was pregnant. My hand holding the phone started to shake. A baby. A grandchild. I hung up with Eleanor and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. I watched the neighbors' kids riding their bikes down the street. A part of me, the grandmother part, felt a sharp, sudden ache. Mark called that evening. I didn't beat around the bush. "I got a letter from Brenda's lawyer," I said. "Is it true?" There was a long pause. "Yes, Mom," he said, his voice heavy. "It's true." I closed my eyes. I thought of a baby who would be my blood, a baby I might never get to hold. But then I thought of the black marker on my cabinets and the pity in Brenda's eyes. My boundaries are for my own safety, I told myself quietly. This wasn't about punishment. It was about survival. I decided it was time. My husband, George, and I had always talked about a cruise to Alaska. We saved the brochures in a drawer. After he passed, I put them away. It felt wrong to go alone. But now, it felt wrong not to. I called Susan. "Are you busy in June?" I asked her. The line crackled a little. "Not if it involves getting out of this town," she said, her voice full of mischief. I booked the trip that afternoon. 2 tickets, a room with a small balcony. It was the first big thing I had ever done just for myself. I felt a little flutter in my chest, like a bird getting ready to fly. It wasn't fear, it was freedom. The air in Alaska was so clean, it felt like a different element. It smelled of pine trees and cold, clean salt water. Susan and I would wrap ourselves in thick wool blankets and sit on our little balcony, watching the world drift by. One morning, we saw a glacier. It was a river of ice, a shade of blue I'd never seen before. It looked ancient and powerful. Later that day, a pod of whales surfaced near the ship. They were enormous, moving with a slow grace that made my heart ache. "It's all so big, isn't it?" I said to Susan. "Makes our little dramas feel pretty small," she agreed, sipping her hot chocolate. She was right. Brenda's greed, Mark's blindness. It all seemed like a tiny, grubby little story next to the size of that glacier. In the gift shop, I bought a postcard of the mountains. I wrote just 3 words on it, addressed it to Mark, and dropped it in the ship's mailbox. "Thinking of you." I came home feeling like my lungs had been scrubbed clean. The house felt quiet, but it was a good quiet now, not a lonely one. I walked into the guest room. It still had a faint scent of Brenda's perfume, the room we kept ready for her and Mark, just in case. I decided, right then, that there would be no more just in case. I called Susan. "I'm turning the guest room into a painting studio," I announced. "Good for you," she said. "No more room at the inn." I spent the next day packing up the fancy guest towels and the potpourri bowl. I dusted the furniture that had sat unused for years. I was making space for myself, for the things I loved. The room needed a fresh coat of paint, and I needed help moving the heavy dresser. Mark came over on Saturday. He didn't ask why I was changing the room. He just rolled up his sleeves. We worked for an hour, moving the heavy bed frame and the old dresser. We didn't talk much. It wasn't the tense silence we'd had for the past year. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind you share with someone when words aren't needed. We were taking a break, drinking lemonade in the kitchen, when he looked at me. His eyes were clear. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. My breath caught in my throat. It was all I ever wanted to hear. He hesitated for a moment, swirling the ice in his glass. "I should tell you," he said, not looking at me. "Brenda lost her job. Someone from the Christmas dinner told someone, who told her boss. The story got out." I didn't feel a single ounce of joy at the news. I didn't feel anything at all, really. It was like hearing about a stranger's misfortune in a town far away. It had nothing to do with me anymore. My world was here, in my house, in my garden. I spent the next few weeks focusing on my roses. I fed them, pruned them, talked to them like George used to. I entered my best blushing pink ones in the county fair. I never expected to win. When they called my name for the blue ribbon, I thought I'd misheard. My picture ended up in the local paper, me holding my ribbon and a bouquet of my own roses. I looked at the grainy photo. My hair was a mess, and I had dirt under my fingernails. But my smile was real. I looked happy. I looked like myself. My niece, Sarah, started coming over every Tuesday. the house filled with the smell of my husband's pot roast, the one with the secret ingredient he only ever told me. The air was thick with the scent of onions and thyme. Sarah's hands, so much younger than mine, were clumsy with the flour as I showed her how to make the gravy. "Aunt Carol, how did you always get it so smooth?" she asked, a little smudge of white on her cheek. "You don't rush it," I told her, my hand guiding hers. "You just have to be patient and listen to what it needs." She looked up at me, her eyes clear and honest. "You're talking about more than just gravy, aren't you?" I just smiled and handed her the whisk. She was a smart girl. She understood. Mark called and asked if he could stop by. He showed up looking thinner, with tired lines around his eyes, but the tightness in his shoulders was gone. We sat at the kitchen table, the one he'd done his homework at as a boy. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence between us. "The divorce is final," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "It's done." I just nodded. There was nothing to say to that. He finally looked at me. "She's getting a settlement. The baby will be taken care of. That's all that matters." He took a deep breath. "I see it now, Mom. How I let her. How I let her words get in my head. I wanted to believe it was easier to have a sick mother than a greedy wife." The confession hung in the air, ugly and true. The next week, I met with my lawyer, Eleanor. Her office smelled like lemon polish and old books. I signed the papers she'd drawn up, my hand steady. We created a trust for my grandchild. It was for education, for medical needs, for a down payment on a house one day. It was ironclad. "The trustee is the bank," Eleanor explained, tapping the page with her pen. "Neither Mark nor Brenda can touch a penny of the principal. It's protected." "Good," I said. "It's not for them. It's for her." I thought of this little baby girl, this person I didn't know, and I felt a fierce wave of a grandmother's love. I was protecting her future from her own mother. I needed to be around something joyful. I started volunteering at the public library on Wednesday mornings, reading to the preschoolers. The room always smelled like paper and Elmer's glue. I loved the feeling of the little ones crowded around my chair, their eyes wide as I read about hungry caterpillars and grumpy bears. Their uncomplicated happiness was a tonic. After one session, as I was putting the books away, a woman approached me. She was about 50, with a kind face. "Excuse me," she said. "You're Carol, right? Mark's mother?" "I am," I said, a little on guard. "I'm Linda," she said, holding out a hand. "My sister Jane used to be Brenda's boss at the accounting firm." Her eyes held a look of deep sympathy. I just wanted to say, we all heard the real story. Life found a new rhythm. It was quiet, but it was my own. The hum of the air conditioner on a hot afternoon, the weight of a good book in my lap, the satisfaction of pulling a stubborn weed from my rose bed. Mark and I started talking again, really talking. The calls were less about his problems and more about my day. "Did you get your blood pressure medication refilled?" he asked one Tuesday. "I did. I took care of it yesterday," I told him. There was a pause. "Okay, good. Just checking." He didn't offer to do it for me. He didn't assume I'd forgotten. He just asked. It was a small thing, but it felt like everything. I hosted Thanksgiving at my house. It was the first big holiday since that awful Christmas dinner. My hands trembled just a little as I took the turkey out of the oven. The rich smell of sage and butter filled my kitchen, a comforting ghost of holidays past. The house was quiet, filled only with people I trusted. My brother carved the turkey. My niece, Sarah, helped me mash the potatoes. My friend Susan brought her famous pecan pie. And Mark was there. He sat at the table watching us, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. There were no pitying looks, no one trying to cut my food. We just talked. We passed the gravy. It was a small gathering, warm and real, a chosen family. As I looked around the table, at the faces lit by the warm dining room light, I thought about how much can change in a year. A few weeks later, a thick envelope from Medicare arrived in the mail. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my reading glasses. The papers were full of codes and numbers, the way government forms always are. I spread them out, the crisp paper cool under my fingertips. I remembered Brenda's voice, so full of fake concern. "It's all so complicated now, Carol. Let me take this burden off you." I took a sip of coffee. I pulled a pen from the mug on the counter and started working my way through the statement, line by line. It took me maybe 20 minutes. I folded it all back up, wrote a check for the premium, and sealed the envelope. It wasn't a burden. It was just my life, and I was perfectly capable of handling it. I wondered if Brenda ever handled her own. One cold morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. It was a picture. A tiny baby, wrapped in a pink and white hospital blanket with a little tuft of dark hair. My heart gave a little squeeze. Below the picture, a short text read, "She's here. We named her Hope." I looked at her perfect little face on the screen. I felt a pang for the grandmother I might have been, the one who could rock her to sleep without a shadow between us. But then I felt a wave of peace. My boundaries were not about punishment. They were about my survival. I typed back a simple message. "She's beautiful." Then I put my phone down and went to water my orchids, which were just beginning to bloom. A year to the day after that Christmas dinner, I was in my garden. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth. Mark was there, helping me prune the roses for winter. He wore my late husband's old gardening gloves. We worked in a comfortable silence, the only sound the steady snip-snip of our shears. He pointed to a thick, thorny cane. "This one looks good, Mom," he said. "Be careful of the thorns," I replied. He nodded and carefully cut it back. We didn't talk about what happened, but it was there, in the space we had given each other. It was in the way he listened when I spoke. It was in the respect he now showed me, a respect that had been earned back, day by careful day. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Mark had gone home. I sat on my back step, holding a warm mug of chamomile tea. My hands were stained with soil from the garden, and I didn't bother to wash them. My old dog, Gus, was asleep at my feet, his side rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I looked at the rose bushes, cut back and ready for their long winter sleep, knowing they would come back stronger in the spring. I looked at my house, the lights glowing warmly in the windows. I was safe. I was respected. I was home. And for the first time in a very long time, I was completely at peace.